on this show, recent episodes, and general science concepts and news. We'll be starting in just a moment, and feel free to put your questions right into the chat for our mods to come and screen, and please try to keep them clear, legible, and understandable. As always, we welcome super chats to help support the show, and you can also find links to our website and other options in the episode description. With all that said, welcome, and let's get started.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Science and Futures with Isaac Arthur's monthly livestream Q&A this New Year's Eve, December 31st, 2023. As usual, we are joined by my co-host and wife, Sarah Fowler Arthur, who will be asking questions from the audience as you put them in of me, and I'll try to give my best answer as we can. I think we probably mod-free because of the holiday right now, so please try to leave them clear and concise and easy to read things so that they don't get lost in the queue. With that said, let's go ahead and get started with our first question.
Well, thank you for including me on these for the last several years. And I actually wanted to give a shout out first to one of your viewers from Ashtabula County that I ran into in the grocery store over the holiday. And Marius told me that you were the inspiration to becoming an engineer.
That is one of the cool things about doing the show for years like this is that when I first got started, people would say, hey, I'm thinking about majoring in physics, should I do that? And now I've got folks who are saying, hey, I don't know if you remember this, but like 8 years back, you convinced me to major in physics, and I just finished up my doctorate, and that is an awesome experience. So thank you for everyone who has been with us for, God, we're on our 10th year now, so it's been a long time. And we're in 6 years into doing the live stream, but this is our 60th one, and we skipped a few here and there. So thank you, Marius, and thank you, everyone.
Miami's Last Capitalist, thank you very much for your super chat. Miami's Last Capitalist says, I will miss these live streams, but I'm glad I got to know you through them. Neil deGrasse Tyson isn't our personal astrophysicist. You are. Thank you.
Well, he's probably, I would say Neil deGrasse Tyson is probably a better physicist when it comes to astronomy than me, but thank you.
Rob Hawk, thank you for your super chat. From all of the sci-fi novels you have read, which device, machine, or gadget do you find to be the most amazing and imaginative? And best wishes for 2024.
Amazing is a little trickier than imaginative. Technically there have been some novels for it, but I was thinking the Stargate from the Stargate SG-1 series or the movie. That's probably one of my favorite fictional devices because it keeps things kind of grounded to the modern era while still letting you explore space and planets, or at least very many forests in Canada, because that's usually where they film them at, as opposed to this or that old quarry in England or desert area in California. Most of sci-fi takes place in those three spots. But let's see. The most imaginative device.
One of your viewers says, beam me up, Scotty.
Well, yeah, no, I would actually say the transport is probably the exact opposite of that. That's the transport and the replicator from Star Trek are probably the worst devices to have included in fiction, because you've probably heard the transporters invented so they didn't have to do the shuttle footage all the time back and forth of them flying. And the replicator was meant to be this cute little thing for letting them, bring and make eating along. But the problem is those are such plot-rending devices that you don't really want to include things like that in the show if you can avoid, or in your sci-fi. The coolest device. Maybe the actual conjoiner drive from Alistair Reynolds' Revelation Space series, or the the neutron star that's almost a black hole that's one gigantic huge stellar mass full of quantum matter. Those are both just really cool real science versions of things that I thought were really awesome.
Rob, I thought for a minute there we had him stumped. Would have been the second time in all of these years. But he pulled it out.
On camera, anyway.
Could utility fog or programmable matter be some kind be used as a force field that could stop bullets? Primaris would like to know.
I know. Force Fields episode, probably like 6 years ago now, we did look at some of those options and say, in physics, there's not an option for force fields other than the actual existing force fields we have, like gravity or electromagnetism, but you could do something that deflects ionized matter away with an electromagnetic field, for instance. But one of your options for a shield is an actual shield. So, for instance, a spaceship might have some thin little panel it carries on with it that it can just shoot out about a kilometer from it, expand rapidly, and let that soak up damage. And it doesn't have to soak that much damage off to deflect stuff, and even the vaporized remnant of it's going to, deflect beams or destroy incoming missiles pretty well. But you could have something like utility fog, where all it did was just move quickly and get in the way of the bullet. The problem is that for a lot of these things, they're only going to be good against people with lower technology than you. Because if you've got utility fog that can jump and get in the way, then their bullets probably can move faster than utility fog can, or could include utility fog of their own to blow those up and so forth. So, and you could still have some kind of competing cycle of armor versus weaponry, it seems we often see in history now. But I would say, just as a whole, yeah, that's one of the options you have for utility fog. Might be some kind of cape that could soak up bullets for you made out of this stuff. There's a lot of options if you have smart metal. For those who don't know, utility fog is one of the nicknames for smart metal, which is basically, imagine the smallest piece of matter you can make that was like an intelligent robot, something like the equivalent of a cell for a human body, but probably an order of magnitude smaller, that could move around and connect with each other and talk. So it's just a tiny little Lego block, but it's a Lego block with its own engine and ability to communicate, so it could just assemble into whatever you want it to. In practice, you might have it assemble into something that looked like an apple, but probably would not be an apple, because you probably would never get anything that was down at the atomic scale. Think cellular level, but maybe smaller than a virus. Small cells, not, atoms.
Yoda What says, Isaac Arthur, the Nyctopin soft weapon from Larry Niven's Ringworld universe is my favorite little bit of sci-fi technology. Among its charms is the ability to project beams that rip matter apart. Niven
comes up with a lot of really good stuff. I mean, the Ringworld is always going to be my favorite there, but he had a lot of ones. We had the, I don't know if he was the first one to come up with the idea, but he had the monomolecular whip concept, where you had one little sword that's like one tiny atom's worth across, and that would be so sharp it could cut through anything, monofilament wire. He also had the standard holes, the general holes. Basically, they could absorb an infinite amount of damage for 1 instant, and they would pause you in time so you didn't take any damage. That was a great way to have a spacecraft hull that was realistic in how it could absorb damage. So basically, you're freezing in time while it takes the damage. Niven was, well, I shouldn't say was, I believe he's still alive. He's just a fascinating source of information for so many ideas. I was actually, one of the scripts I just wrote, Topopolis, Eternal River, that one is something that he first suggested too. So,
very good. Well, Timothy Kuiper would like to know if it is generally accepted that gravity causes time dilation, and there seems to be an alternating theory that the time dilation is actually causing gravity. He wants to know what your thought is on this debate.
That's one of those ones where you can probably argue that is the other way around. Like, we're saying, is the universe expanding, or is everything inside it contracting? And I say, well, it could be either one of those. You wouldn't have any way of telling if it were, a situation like that. I'm not sure I'd say that's the case with time and gravity per se, but I would stick to treating it as gravity causes time to slow down. Space and time contract around it. So you could probably make the argument that it was the other way around, that experiencing time is what allowed that, but the issue we have is that gravity and time are both weird little anomalies. They both only seem to be one direction, whereas most of the things in nature can go, you forward or back, as it were, very easily. We don't necessarily want to assume that they are super interconnected, though. That's kind of like with the unified forces thing. We found that electromagnetism and magnetism and electricity were the same thing, or electric force were the same thing. And we had electromagnetism, and we said, oh, wait, that's the same as the weak nuclear force, too. Well, we combine that one, and we found it connected to the strong force. As the assumption is, well, we must be able to connect all of these together to include gravity, too. And perhaps we may be able to at sometimes, but wishing something to be the case doesn't necessarily make it so. I think sometimes we're chasing grand unified theories a little bit too enthusiastically. You gotta, let's see what the evidence says is the actual case, not try to assume it's the case and build towards it. Tempting though it is.
Escala says, I think that there are unknown forces in this universe that are so outrageously, unimaginably complicated that we humans just simply can't conceive it.
There's a good chance of that. Yeah, I mean, it's to some degree you expect stuff to be simple, although I say, well, I can't remember, maybe it was Einstein. There's a lot of things attributed to him that aren't actually things he said too, though. Say it's something you can tell if it's right as a theory, if it's incredibly simplistic when you want to see it. The answer turns out to be really straightforward as opposed to something really insanely complicated like retrograde planetary cycles was. Before they just decided to switch over to the Copernican approach to planetary models. I said, well, yeah, that could be it. We could say that something's right in science if it's simple rather than complex. Only problem is that's letting poetry govern how you want to approach these things. There's nothing simple about how volatile molecules work. That we've tried modeling these. The basic thing about them is very simple. They're running on these electrostatic forces, but how those actually work out, emergent properties of systems, tends to be very complicated. Sometimes they have very simple rules they obey, like chess is an emergent property of human psychology, which is very complicated, and the physical laws of the universe, which are pretty simple in some ways. It has nothing to do with either of those, but it is an emergent property of them. So we don't always want to assume that everything in the universe is going to be very simple, and that's how we know it's right. Some of the stuff may be insanely complicated. People would tend to assume that pi must have some, we don't think these days, but some set number of digits or be some perfect ratio, because that would make it more beautiful. And beauty is truth, and truth is beauty. And I can't recall off the top of my head who said that. I should be able to, but I don't see a lot of indication that that statement is actually true. But might be more beautifully so.
Galen says, you have an episode on colonizing the sun. Have you given any thought to an episode on colonizing hot Jupiters?
I have, though I should probably point out that no one has ever dared me to do that one. I guess we did kind of do one on making Jupiter a second sun. That was probably the hot Jupiter episode to some degree too. Chthonian planets, which did not do well in the poll, would have been, Chthonian planets, would have been the probably the hot Jupiter episode. But for anyone who was wondering, colonizing the sun was one of the occasions somebody made a bet at me as to whether I could make an episode, and I decided I was going to make that episode. I said, could you actually colonize a star? The other one was the search and rescue episode. We did high-tech search and rescue. Somebody had bet me if I could find a way to come up with a way to use a nuclear device legitimately, to use a nuclear bomb in a search and rescue exercise, to help save somebody. And I didn't find a way. I found 4 of them. I love that episode, so I always like to find an excuse to use nuclear bombs to solve problems.
And what episode was that again?
High-tech search and rescue.
High-tech search and rescue. Christian Corello, thank you for your super chat. Do antimatter rockets have to be thin and long as often depicted, or is there some design flexibility if we invent better antimatter production and storage?
The main reason to making each ship thin and long that's for interstellar purposes is to cut down on the stuff you're hitting as you go through space. Generally speaking, we would say the ideal minimum radius for a spin gravity environment is about 250 meters radius, because at that point, what was that diameter? Yeah, I'll check it. I'll use that. But that radius is what you feel comfortable at less than 2 rotations per minute. It doesn't cause nausea any more than turning a chair maybe twice a minute, or turning around the kitchen will make you nauseous. So that's kind of your minimum diameter. You don't necessarily want to go much above that if you can avoid that, because the wider you get, the more stuff you are going to plow through at a high fraction of the speed of light. And that's the usual reason why we depict these things as being very long and narrow. And then we usually tend to treat them as cylinders or cones, because there's no real assumption that, like a Navy ship, they really need a prow on them. As you've seen something like Warhammer 40,000, where the ships all look like old ships of line or cathedrals going through space. It's very artistic, but not really very logical way to build a ship per se. For the purpose of the engine, it doesn't make any difference at all. I think with antimatter, the biggest thing would be wanting to have a nozzle of whatever material you're using to reflect gamma rays or what's coming out the back of the thing. That was letting you kind of focus the beam a little bit, so you weren't wasting too much off to the sides. So that's the biggest thing, is you ideally want your rockets, propellant to come out the back in a straight line right behind you. And the more spread out it is, the more it's sending off some of that force to either side of you, rather than helping to propel you along. So you want to minimize that as tightly as you can.
Clash says, we often talk about building large rotating habitats in orbit, but how exactly would you actually get the materials needed to build them up there into orbit, whether from the Earth or the Moon or elsewhere?
A lot of it depends on how good we get at launching things. Like, if you have an orbital ring already up in space, then you probably do all your low orbit materials right from Earth itself, because Earth has so much of it. The asteroid belt is a tiny fraction of the total mass the Moon has, and the Moon's mass is 1/80 of what Earth has. So you always can get more off of Earth than you are all these asteroids and moons. On the other hand, you have to pay way less actual fuel cost to move stuff from the Moon to Earth. But, I guess it would be the example of it might be cheaper to get something off of Antarctica in terms of how much fuel it takes to cut it out of there, but if you had to transport that whole way and you're having actually there to walk, you have to pay 10 times as much to actually employ someone in those locations. It might kind of start cutting that ability to have that as a cheaper option. So with something like an orbital ring where you're not really paying anything other than maintenance to get stuff up into space, you mine stuff from down on Earth. Without something like that, and we'd say an earlier era of space development, you're probably getting off the moon or a near-Earth asteroid, just because that's, as strange as it sounds, getting something 100 miles up in the air is harder than moving at 1,000,000 miles across empty space. And so your question comes down to, can I actually dig out and mine and refine and build stuff, especially dumb matter like a big metal plate off the moon or an asteroid easier that can shove it up through the Earth's atmosphere? And that's one of those things where we just don't really know until we have a chance to actually start doing it on a more industrial scale.
D. Cragen says, "Hi all from the UK. Who else is from a time zone where they have rearranged the New Year's Eve plans somewhat in order to watch this last live stream live?"
Statistically, about half our, well, not quite half, something like 40% of our audience lives in the UK over east to about Russia, somewhere in Western Europe or Eastern Europe. And then most of the remainder lives in North America, with a lot of folks over in Australia and elsewhere. But our folks in Japan, I'm trying to remember the timeline, if the dateline is, which side of the dateline Japan's on. I think they already had their New Year. So for anyone who's over there, Happy New Year already. I think Iraq was 8 hours ahead when I was there. So Happy New Year to everyone in Baghdad, or very shortly thereafterwards, everyone in Delhi. Happy New Year. So.
Raven, could robots take on lifelike characteristics like cells and respiration?
Very much so. I think that the thing to keep in mind is that when we're talking about robots, like back in the day when Asimov was playing around the concept, he used the term CFE or carbon ion Fe life forms to kind of indicate that a robot was an ion-based life form and we were carbon-based. Well, now we have semiconductors and we say they were silicon-based life forms. But whether or not you're built out of titanium or a robot made out of titanium or carbon or whatever it is, a robot would be a machine. You're a purpose-built machine, and a life form is by default going to be a purpose-built machine whose purpose is principally to stay alive, right? So as its main purpose is to stay alive and reproduce. So you make a von Neumann probe, like an Astro Chicken, which will be one of our poll options soon.
Thought that was one of your favorites.
It is one of my favorites. That would probably qualify as a life form, and I have problems saying how you would, under a biological definition, say that it wasn't, unless you hold to a very strict biological definition that only something following the biochemistry of Earth was alive, which would then have the problem of saying, well, if you bump into alien life that's made out of, say, germanium, that automatically isn't alive, even though it's waving at you and has wants to have a conversation. And say, well, you're not alive, so I'm not going to talk to you. I'm not sure that's really going to be a good definition to work off of, but yeah, I would say, generally speaking, to steal alive in the Supreme Court, we know it when we see it. I think with most things that would qualify as alive, we were having a problem telling they are.
Trooper Nate says, "Hi Isaac, I moved that the term habitable only apply to atmospheres conducive to human life. We need to find a term for atmospheres potentially capable of supporting any life. Do you have thoughts?"
There was always that temptation, because in Star Trek they had the M-class planet, which they always stayed way away from ever explaining until, I think it was in Star Trek Enterprise, that, I was about to say the newer one, but 20 years ago, that one, where there was some word in Vulcan that I can't remember what it was called, but it was unpronounceable. But, a planet that's designed to actually allow a human, presumably a Vulcan, to, open up their helmet and breathe and not fall over dead 5 seconds later. In terms of what would be an atmosphere we could survive on, if you got a good power supply in your suit, you could potentially be recycling your own oxygen, or, having a compressor running in your suit that, got enough oxygen into you, the atmosphere was very thin. As to what qualifies as a atmosphere that life could live on, we know it doesn't have to be an oxygen-based atmosphere, because we have life forms that don't, of course, breathe oxygen, but they, in fact, are poisoned by it. So, you'd almost have to say any atmosphere that was high enough to actually allow a good amount of liquid states to occur. So that might just be a pressure region. Above I don't know, 1,000 pascals, and it's good to go. Then there's maybe one where it's too high to the point where you really could not realistically have much of the normal chemistry going on because the pressure was so high things tend to turn to crystals too easily, or turn to metals. That might be the upper end of that. However, I think this is one of those ones where we really can't put that defining line in there until we've actually found a whole bunch of actual planets and looked at them. Because we did this game before with our own planets in the 20th century. Those are the ones we had to look at was the 8/9 planets in our solar system. And we actually had more than that in the 19th century. We included 4 of the asteroids as planets for a while. Ceres, Vesta, Pallas, and Juno, I think. Those were planets for a while. And what we found is that we divide everything into rocky planets and gas giants plus Pluto. And that really wasn't a very good definition because Jupiter is very not like Saturn. They are very far apart as planets go, but they're the only two that are gas giants. Uranus and Neptune are quite dislike too, but they're ice giants. And then we got airless rocks and Earth and Venus. And it's these are not the only categories of planets you find out in the galaxy at large either. So we need more examples if we do a real taxonomy of planets.
Well, I would like to give a quick shout out to the moderators. Unfortunately, everyone is, or fortunately, I guess, depending on for them, is off celebrating the new year with their family and friends, but it's definitely been a huge help to me getting some assistance from Maya Skill and Sindri over the last couple of years while we've been doing this, and I'd like to thank them for tuning in so frequently and helping make sure that this chat and live stream runs smoothly.
Yeah, and just in general, we have a lot of moderators on all of those social media forums, not just Discord, where they're both moderators at, but like Facebook, Reddit, etc. And those folks volunteer their time, tons and tons of their time, and it is, it's how do you say thank you to people who just keep doing that year after year? And the answer is you just keep saying thank you, because it is one of those things where shows like this, they can run without their social media forums. You don't have to have them. I have a lot of friends who have shows that don't have them, but I don't think our show could run without those, because so much of what we do is that talk back and forth with the audience to find up ideas that are fascinating to us all and to discuss those. And, probably about half our episodes have at some point been conversations I've had with people in one of our chats or forums, just discussing something, bringing it up, talking about it more. So without those healthy forums and without people who moderate them, I don't think the show would really exist.
I thought for a moment we were out of questions, but I saw them continuing to pop up on your screen, and I couldn't figure out. I had to reboot mine here. So here's a question from TS. I wonder if building structures from neutron stars, including the stars themselves, being ordered internally as one case, and structures with fine-tuned gravitational regions around them, I guess if that's possible.
Maybe.
You have a lot of love on the pie tie today.
It's, for the last time, I never actually wear this one out in public. I did a few times, but after I've been wearing it on the live stream for about a year, I was thinking I should probably order myself a spare one. I couldn't find it again. It was no longer around. They must have not had a big order on it. And so I stopped wearing it out to any events. And thankfully, my wife had actually got me some ties that I got a lot more compliments on, too, anyway. So this one has been hanging up very carefully off the side. They are only getting used for the show for a long time, or for sometimes when I do interviews. I stopped the live streams before I could start wearing it in public again. But I didn't want to travel and risk losing it. So I guess the question with neutron stars, I mentioned earlier with interesting technologies that in Alistair Reynolds' novel Revelation Space, they come across a neutron star that has been basically very carefully imploded to be right above the line to be in a black hole, and all organized into one gigantic computer. Computronium, the densest state of computerization they could come up with. And I'm not quite sure how you would pull that off, but it's a fascinating idea, is that you could kind of... we won't go into too much on that right now, because read the book. It's one of the best ones out there. He'll discuss it more there. But if you can play with the gravitational constant, if you can tune any of the actual physical constants, and we talked about that in reality manipulation 2 weeks ago. There's a lot of things you can get around, to doing that would just seem otherwise insane or impossible. As an example, your best orbit you're ever going to get is something like neutronium. which is, that condensed neutron state of matter, because that can actually absorb a neutron. That's how we actually get things like phosphorus, is when a implosion of a supernova is going on, the matter is so dense that it can actually absorb neutrinos. And so you can potentially have an armor made of neutron star. But of course, you couldn't have that be more thick than 1 or 2 atoms, or you'd be trying to carry around like 1 million tons of armor on you, which would not work very well. And so if you could find some way to arrange all those atoms and just have them stay there like that, that would be an awesome thing if they were just 1 atom layer thick. But those are the kinds of things, if you could play with physical constants, you could probably get away with, especially in a case like that. You might say, well, I'm going to carry around 1 million tons of armor, but it doesn't actually weigh 1 million tons. It only weighs nothing, or like 1 pound, because I've played around with the gravitational constant in that area, and I've played around with the inertial constant in that area, so I can actually move it. There's a lot of things you can do if you can actually play around with those constants, and then you could do things like decide, I am going to go build myself a bunker in the middle of a big neutron star, and no one will be able to find me because I'm buried down inside there and somehow not crushed down to to a singularity in the process. So, and we don't, you cannot rule out that things like that might actually be possible, though we have no idea at all how we would actually manipulate a physical constant.
Well, we have a super chat from Mookie. Thank you, Mookie, and we seem to be having a lot of issues with the thing. It keeps on popping up an ad, well, it keeps popping up an ad and then getting rid of the chat, which I don't know why it's doing that.
YouTube has gotten obnoxious about ads and reasons. And for the record, I've definitely put a lot more ads on my own show because YouTube basically tells you do it or else. More friendly than that, though, to be fair. There are so many more ads on YouTube anymore and everywhere. It's irritating.
Brian Silver says, question, will my Cybertruck be able to perform autonomous snow plowing, or will I need an autonomous bot with snowplow AI added on to drive it?
That's a good question.
I wonder if it's snowing somewhere.
Well, there's always that question, and this goes back to an asthma and things too, was at that time computers were huge and expensive, and the idea was, well, would you make 20 different vehicles or devices that had a robot brain in them that only did one thing, or would you make a humanoid robot, or you make a robot that could go operate any of these devices? And if you're going to make a robot to go operate each of these devices, you make it look like a human, so that a human could still use those tools. You don't have to re-engineer your robot, all your tools to fit that non-humanoid robot. In practice, what we're finding is that it's actually probably going to be cheaper in most cases to purpose-build a robot with a purpose-built brain. If you've seen Total Recall, the original Total Recall with Schwarzenegger, there you've got the Johnny Cab, I think it is. It's a little humanoid robot that sits in the driver's seat of a car and does the driving for you. And we use a similar piece of stock footage when we talk about automated cars a lot on the channel. It's got a little robot sitting there at the wheel. And of course, you would never waste that seat on a robot that just sits there. You want something that would get out and be your valet and move your bags for you. Maybe then you'd have a humanoid robot, but why not have them fold themselves up in the trunk? So I think in most cases your autonomous snowplow would be an actual snowplow that ran itself, though. That's kind of hard with tractors, because the tractors use the approach of here's this big mobile engine that you have the PTO on, or the front loader, that you can go ahead and attach various tools to. And we have a very long driveway and live in an area that sometimes gets 2 feet of snow at once, so we have to plow with the tractor here. And my 8-year-old son has to go do the porch. But little kids are great for moving snow. But you get the tractor out, and you have to push that with a bucket. Of course, you can change the bucket out for a forklift, etc. And so, you might decide I'm going to get a robot built into my tractor that can do all these things for me instead. And I think that's just going to come down to which is faster and easier to build and doesn't require people to replace a lot of their equipment too. And that might be a different case than a car, because people are used to replacing their cars every 5 to 10 years. People, on the other hand, drive their tractors and implements those things a lot older than the people using them. There's a lot of tractors in service still to this day that are older than I am, and I got a finish mower out back that's, I think, if not older than me, older than my wife. It's an old one, and it's in beautiful condition still. Despite me backing up in a tree the one time.
Yeah, about that.
Yeah, well, it was looking. I was being so careful with one thing I was paying attention to. I didn't pay attention to backing up. Wonderful device anyway.
Christian Corello, thank you for your super chat. Which types of radiators work best for starships, in case you back up into a planet? Now, I've looked into dusty plasma radiators for avoiding debris, but is it actually practical and efficient?
Possibly. So there was a space station design I saw one time where it had the radiators coming out the side of the space station that was spinning. It wasn't like a non-rotating structure. And the gravity is higher the further out you get from something that's spinning. So if you got one gravity on the inside and you got radiators that are sticking out at twice the distance, then they got 3 G's of gravity in them. And you could certainly pump liquids through there. I think in some ways you might set that up as a really nice radiating system. You have big long fins extending that way. But generally speaking, I wouldn't want to be doing maintenance on anything that was spinning around with a 3G of gravity. It seems like that would just cause a lot of problems. You want... Probably, I would say your favorite place to do maintenance in space is about 1/10 of a G, because then things tend to move where you expect them to, but they don't move very fast. It's always nice to know which direction down would be. Radiators... In a interstellar spacecraft moving at a high fraction of light speed, I'd rather do my heat radiation behind the ship. So you stand out, and again... You're not accelerating very fast in these things, especially if you're in cruise mode. You're not accelerating at all. So you extend out some big long tether. It might be miles and miles long. Like you could drag a nuclear reactor 100 miles behind your ship if you want to. Just use that power cable as the tether to it, then reel it back in. So when you actually need to slow down, so you're cutting down the radiation you get. Same for radiator modules. Why not just send them out way, way behind you? If it's not a very good thermal conductor or material that you're using, or if you have to pump it down, through pressurized pipes. Obviously, that puts a limitation on your length to some degree, but by and large, you don't want to do anything to increase your cross-section. And so you could also put them out as big, thin fins coming out the side as a heat sink too, because if it's, this thin, but really wide and long, as its cross-section, it's not going to, set that much material either. But you also have to be worried about just general wear and tear and radiation. I think it's too thin out there in space too. So I would generally say running out behind you is the best place. I wouldn't want to... you could put them in front of you, for that matter, too. They'll take damage, but then you can bring an individual piece of radiator and recycle it, and then they're taking damage to your ship. So that's another option, is using as forward shooting plus radiators.
Matt Schaefer says, congratulations on all of your successes this year, and thank you for the hard work, and all the best in the coming year.
Thank you.
And I think that brings us to the mid-break,
all right,
and a few more questions when we come back.
We'll have a break, and we'll see you in about 3 minutes.
Welcome to our mid-live stream break, and while we'll grab you a drink and a snack, make sure to get any questions into our mods for the second half of the show. As mentioned, this is going to be our last live stream for a while. We may do some in the future, but I think I'd like to move away from a monthly scheduled event, and it was starting to get to be as much an endeavor as making an entire normal episode, so I decided I'd honestly rather do one of those. We might do one quarterly or consider doing interviews at some point, but I like my video essay style. You can still ask me questions in the comments on videos and Patreon or various social media forums, or email me at isaac.author.youtube@gmail.com, with YouTube spelled as U-T-U-B-E. As you've probably noticed, we had a good deal more episodes in November and December, and have many for January too, more than we normally released, and mostly that was me having a bit of a writing bug after finishing the 3-hour 4pm Paradox Compendium, where I did a number of shorter episodes, and indeed some of those got released before that episode did. Of course, a short episode for me is still about 20 minutes, so what it mostly indicates is that I felt I was wanting to write a lot of topics, particularly after those image pulls we started doing last year, and lacked the stamina for writing 8 30-plus minute episodes a month. But I'm thinking our new average will be 6 to 8 episodes a month, plus 5 or 6 60-second short videos as mood takes me. Especially as the various bonus episodes over on Nebula start hitting the 1-year mark. I love Nebula and like having exclusive content there, and the various extended editions of episodes from 2020 and 2021 will remain exclusively there, I think. But I want those other episodes, once they've been up there for a year, to come over to YouTube for everyone else to see, and the general consensus from folks on Nebula and Patreon, as best I can tell, is that they like the bonus content too, but are happy with just having early access. Every episode comes out there a few days early, and the Nebula monthly exclusives are there for 12 months. For anyone wondering about the shorts, I am not planning on any more compilations at this time, since YouTube lets us make playlists for them now, and I do have those up on TikTok and I'm getting them up as Reels on Instagram. In terms of contacting me, I am really not on either of those platforms there. I flat out loathe TikTok, but it's a chance to reach more folks with these ideas. I'm better about checking the more traditional social media and Discord. Obviously, I've got some time restraints on answering correspondence, but I try to devote some time every day to that, and I'm grateful for it too. It's how many an episode idea emerged, and it also has often cheered me up. I have a genuinely awesome audience, and one that many other creators are very jealous of. I'd originally just planned to do a few live streams as an experiment, but 60 live streams and over 5 years later, it seems strange to think of it as a temporary thing. The bonus Sci-Fi Sunday episode experiment is just a bit older itself. I know Sarah and I have both enjoyed it a lot, and there are some of you who have been here nearly as often as we have, and always had good questions and comments. Those I will miss greatly, and I may do an occasional scripted Q&A at the end of regular episodes too, where I can keep the answers nice and concise. For everyone out there, thank you for tuning in. As we head into the new year, I hope you're still enjoying our show and looking forward to year 10, because I know I am. Thanks for tuning in this New Year's Eve, and now let's get back to the show and back to more of your questions.
Forgot to turn it back on. Of course I did. So I have this little sign to myself that tells me that the intermission is actually over, and then it comes with a little sign saying, "Oh, it might be broken," and that's what told me to remind me that it was time to turn it off and get back to the episode. So, anyway, thank you for bearing with us during the extended intermission, and welcome back to our second half, and we'll get to more of your questions now.
Well, we had a follow-up on one of the questions from earlier, actually, and Yoda says, ancient Greeks were very bothered by irrational numbers like pi and square root equals 2, so they seem to have already come up with the concept that truth equals beauty.
Yeah, no, that's a good example there. I think they might just we tend to be irritated by something that doesn't have a good pattern to it either. And a lot of times, I would never suggest you get to the habit of assuming the answer can only be X because it doesn't seem simple, but a lot of times the answer when you get it is actually a pretty simple one. So a lot of times when something is the main effect or a couple main effects, it's not very many drivers that are causing this or that thing to occur. So on the flip side, you can't constantly go looking around to try to find what little adjustment factor I could put on this equation that's going to smooth over the problem. That's been done a lot and has often caused us to go down rabbit holes that we didn't need to go down to in science.
Isaac Bordeaux, thank you for tuning in today. He says, how can you stay so optimistic about the future despite all of the bad news in the world?
The weirdest thing is I never thought of myself as a particularly optimistic person until people kept saying on the show all the time. When I was in the service, in the Army, people usually in my unit tended to think of me as being kind of on the cynical side, although also would describe me as very cheerful. And I think that what it comes down to is I'm so used to expecting the worst case scenario that whenever something good does happen, I am cheered up by that. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst. That way you're rarely disappointed and often pleasantly surprised. I think that was my motto for a long time. The flip side of that, though, is that when you spend so much time, when you have something unfortunate come up, when you have a difficulty come up or a worst case scenario come up, you can fold up into a little fetal ball and cry and wait till it's over, or you can actually try to figure out a way to deal with it. And when you get enough practice at dealing with them, or you see enough of them being dealt with, you do start getting a little bit more optimistic in general. I think just because you start realizing those, not every problem necessarily has a solution, but you can usually find something that will at least mitigate the problem a little bit. And when you start feeling that almost every problem can be solved with enough hard work and effort and brains, I think that does tend to make you feel a lot more optimistic about civilization, because I know a lot of people who are hard workers, put a lot of effort into things and have a lot of brains, often all in the same package. And so, yes, It's not that I think of humanity as being wonderful people who are always working for our best interests. No, it's that I tend to think there are a lot of good people who work pretty hard to try to deal with our problems, and they've got a pretty good track record so far, in my opinion. However bad life can seem on a day-to-day basis, remember two things. First, any journalist will flat out tell you honestly these days they are told to put out bad-sounding news and to phrase things that way because it gets better ratings. People click on it. They don't like it, but they kind of have to do it that way. You can literally choose the phrasing on a video, and I try not to do this, so that it sounds more pessimistic, and people are angry and people click on it. So one, you are being actively brainwashed, and they will freely tell you they are doing that to make it sound worse, so you will click on it. Keep that in mind when looking at the world. A lot of good things are actually happening, not just bad ones. And two, life is way better nowadays than has ever been before by any objective, measure. Maybe not for one given individual, but for people as a whole. Life is just way, way better in almost every possible regard. Sometimes people will say other than that, but they're simply being dishonest with themselves when they say that. This end of 2023 is a good year. We had that hard patch through COVID, but things are improving again, and they're going to be even better in 2024, and it'll be even better in 2025. And maybe 2026 will be a little harder or easier than the year before that, but generally speaking, it's going to keep getting better as long as we keep putting effort into trying to make it better. And for me, that makes it a lot more easy to wake up in the morning cheerful that I'm going to get something done that's going to actually matter and last and, feel accomplished.
Richard Catlin asks, what would be the upper limit in mass for a ship that could enter a planet with an atmosphere without burning up the planet?
That's
always a good optimistic starting point.
But I will say, if you figure out what the actual temperature the atmosphere has to hit to get the gene's escape velocity or the escape velocity of the planet, if you know that temperature, then you can figure out how much energy the atmosphere would need to be at that temperature, and you can figure out how much kinetic energy that ship would need to have that, and thus you would know what mass it would have at a normal re-entry speed. So off the top of my head, I want to say the Earth's atmosphere weighs 10 to the 18th kilograms. That might be off by an order of magnitude or two. And for something to leave the atmosphere, it would have to have a similar amount of energy to whatever was, going into the atmosphere on re-entry if it was slowing down. So probably, probably somewhere on the order of 10 to the 18th or 10 to 19th kilograms. It's a lot of mass. That's like a billion kilograms.
We have a few good wishes here, and a Happy New Year from Australia, the UK, India, and a question from Sonabella. Hi, Isaac. Does the universe follow math laws, or is math how we describe the universe?
That's a question that I know mathematicians who argue about, so I'm not going to weigh in with an official opinion on that. My own thought is that math is a construct of humans, in the sense of like 1, 2, 3, 4, numbers like that, but that that math is not a arbitrary thing either. Kind of like with that beauty and truth thing easier, I hope you say, well, math is a fundamental language. No, I wouldn't say so. If you're good at math, you're very good at composing music. I've known a few mathematicians who were good musicians, but many who were not too. So we want to be kind of careful with poetic descriptions there. I think that the universe itself follows principles that can be described mathematically, and that a different universe would probably also follow principles that we describe mathematically, and probably by the same math. But that is speculative because we don't have another universe to look at and check that out.
I think this is an interesting question from Asmov Clark. Would a robot made of smart matter need a solid skeleton to provide structure and allow faster movements without overheating?
That's a very good point. I would tend to say yes. Or it wouldn't necessarily need to have it, but that would be the way that you would probably want to do it. We talked about that in the smart matter episode, and we talked about the T-3000 in Terminator Genesis, the one where they turn John Connor into a bad guy. Just screw the franchise. But I'm not happy with the way that franchise went after the second movie, to be honest. What was I talking about?
Robot skeletons?
Okay, so an endoskeleton is a handy thing to have for a lot of reasons. And when you're dealing with smart matter, that robot was made out of a bunch of the types of smart matter. and it doesn't have an actual skeleton in a case like that. When you're dealing with smart matter, it's a bunch of little robots that are connected together by reaching out and holding your hand or something like that. They're not actually being held in place by fundamental physical forces as strong as the bonds between, say, molecules would tend to be. So the bonds are a little bit weaker, same as ourselves. Those are not really super strong. It's a lot easier to tear you apart than it is, say, a big thing of steel. So if you hold a bunch of little robots, you might be able to have a stronger bond, but then normal cells do, but you're not going to have a stronger bond as a titanium endoskeleton would. So if you're looking for strength in a case like that, you probably want to do it that way. Same as we're talking about little tiny nanobots, they could theoretically take things apart atomically and build more, of themselves and steal out of that, but they'd be much more likely to build a gigantic ceramic kiln, dump metal into that, and use those metal ingots or whatever to make more of themselves, as opposed to doing it as a postal process. It's likely faster.
I had a question pulled up, and now I've got the chat doohickey. Let's go.
Buggy. Well, it was probably on vacation at YouTube right now.
It wants to sell me something. Another question from Azimuth Clark, would it be more efficient to live on one giant birch planet or on multiple smaller ones?
Would it be more efficient is a tricky question. The thing about a birch planet is you have to, the idea is that you'd be slowly building a gigantic shell around an existing black hole. You might feed more stuff into it. You might decide to feed your whole galaxy into it. But when you're doing that feeding process, you're getting a lot of energy out of that as well. So you have to, you don't want to just waste that energy. You'd be using it. So you're probably only pumping matter into it at the rate your civilization needs that energy. So it's not so much that it's an efficient structure versus an inefficient one, it's more that it's a late stage structure. But something you build way down the road. I would say that living on individual planets, though, is never really going to be very efficient in general. Gravity wells, what my friend Facial Kane said is, if you've gone to all the effort of escaping gravity wells, you shouldn't go around settling new ones. Go to rotating habitats. It makes more sense. That's probably going to be your most efficient structure.
So, YJ says, since rotating habitats don't actually have gravity, do they not move with the air in them, or most of the air with them, or anyone who hasn't thrown himself toward the ground in the right way?
Well, I have a graphic that our friend Ken York had put together that actually will visually show this. If you look into one of our rotating habitat episodes, I tend to use it a lot. But the thing to remember is that when you jump up on a rotating habitat, you're still moving forward, and so is the shell. So you go basically like that and run into the floor again. You jump up in the air, or you hang yourself in the air. It is exactly like being on this planet, with one minor tweak, and it's based on how wide it is. Here on Earth, we have Coriolis forces from the planet spinning, and it spins quite fast, like 1,000 miles an hour. And that means that if I send any kind of projectile missile up through the air, and then back down again, it isn't going to land quite straight ahead. It's going to curve out to one side or another, depending on how fast it was going and which direction it was moving, if it's north or south hemisphere. This actually gave us a bit of a problem during the conflict between Britain and Argentina with the Falkland Islands, is the missiles were targeted for the northern hemisphere and they weren't aimed right in the southern hemisphere, so they're missing their targets, or at least so I've heard. But that same force is in play on a space station that's rotating too, so you're not going to land exactly right back down on the ground again. You're going to be slightly off. Now, if you were jumping up and down on one, just you, me, as a normal human at normal speed, you're going to need like a tiny little ruler and calipers to find out how much you were off by, seeing as you would on this planet. But at a bigger distance, it can matter. Other than that, you jump up in the air, you go right back down again. It's just a rotating frame of reference. You have to think about what you're doing at that time too, and remember that you're both turning. You have inertia. It's like, now, you're driving around a car and you go around a sharp corner. I pull you into the back seat from the front seat. Your seat disappears. I pull you back away from your door, seat, or up in the air. You are going to fall back down towards that window. You're not going to float in the air because you still have your inertia to deal with. And it can be hard to visualize it sometimes, but it really is what happens. Now, if I pop open a magic wormhole and dump you right into the middle of the thing, where there's no spin gravity, it's going to take a long time before little bits of Brownian motion start forcing you into the air, which will push on you and start giving you inertia and bringing you up to that gravitational amount. But for the most part, that's kind of the same thing that applies here. If I open up a wormhole right over Earth, does it take time for gravity to reach out and grab you and pull you down, since gravity moves at the speed of light. And that is an almost impossible question to answer because we don't have that proper theory of quantum gravity or wormholes yet. But no, when you jump up in a rotating habitat, you go right back down again, just like you are on a planet.
Well, we have a super chat from Alexander Potachev. If you cannot build an O'Neill cylinder in orbit, would it be feasible to build it on Earth, float it high onto the atmosphere like a hot air balloon by heating the air inside, and then use rockets to get it into orbit?
Just maybe that time on the live stream we had the vacuum Raccoons incidents, which was supposed to be a vacuum rockets, but it got misspelled and typoed. And it's called a Raccoon.
You mean the computer auto-corrected?
Well, yeah, there's something called a Raccoon, which is where you have a balloon that's got a rocket on it, and it got misspelled. And you could theoretically have that instead of being a balloon filled with helium, it could be a rigid structure that was a vacuum inside, thus even more buoyant, and it's called a vacuum Raccoon. And we are calling that now. It's almost never actually referenced anywhere. So I heard vacuum Raccoon. I could not figure out what the heck that was supposed to be on one of the questions. But could you float something up like that? And the answer is, it would have to be a really big space station, one probably wide enough to actually be up above the atmosphere, because if you got thick hull plating on that, it's still going to have a density more than air. Like, air has a density of about 1.41 kilograms per cubic meter. Steel is about 5,000 times that. So if you have a steel plating, it needs to be 1 millimeter thick for every meter of air you've got, no thicker, or it's going to be the same density as air and won't float. And then you need to lower that even more to get to float up into the high atmosphere, where things start dropping out about 1,000th of the normal pressure. There's a reason why we can't get many balloons up much above 30 miles. But I would say you wouldn't really have a problem building that up in orbit anyway. You set up the big sheets and you can even bend them up in space if you want to. It's not that hard to bend metal. But you just send up the hull plating and then you assemble it up there like a big set of Legos.
So we have quite a few more questions here. I'm going to try to get us through as many as possible. We have a short question from Interdimensional Demon. Hi, Isaac Arthur. What types of megastructures would a hive mind use?
Oh my. It depends on what kind of hive mind it is. If this is a gigantic computer hive mind, it probably uses a lot of solar collectors for computers. If it is just a regular hive mind, probably the same kind we would use, except like if you're a hive mind that has a maximum radius of say 30 miles, that you can really have best connectivity over to your nodes or slave mines, then you probably don't build rotating habitats more than 30 miles wide, even if you got the technology for it. So, and then the question would be, why would you, use your hive mind your actual species? You might actually have a species that is made of hive minds of thousands of minds, but they have a population of billions, so there's like 1 million hive minds. Beyond that, see our episode Hive Minds for more discussion of hive minds.
Kevin Zalea says, in theory, if an astronaut could see millions of bioluminescent microorganisms who have become adapted to outer space, could it look like an ocean of light of sorts?
Yes. I'm trying to think of how you'd have bioluminescent things floating around in space, what they'd be bioluminescent for, but you could certainly engineer something to do that. That might look kind of pretty. Thinking like little pools of bioluminescent fungi on the moon now.
Maybe a different kind of northern lights?
Yeah, well, it's definitely a cool one, as a thought.
Bioluminescent space lights. Erotocratus Scordillus. In Baxter's manifold, time, future humans constructed Dyson-like structures around supermassive black holes for generating power and perhaps computation. Would that be possible under known physics?
Baxter was usually pretty good about keeping his science good and hard. And I'd recommend, for an example, earlier we were talking about different gravitational constants. His novel Rat, which is kind of like the first book of the Z sequence, or second, I can't remember how it quite goes in the chronology. That's a really good one to look at. But I have read Manifold, but Baxter was great for science, but I didn't really like his style of his prose, so usually I read his books one time, so I don't really remember the details as much as I do ones I reread a lot, like Asimov or Clarke, so I cannot recall that specific megastructure, but just in general with Baxter, if he puts it in there, the science is usually solid.
We have someone only caught part of the comment about the raccoon in space. They said they must need more sleep.
Vacuum Raccoon. I'm never going to forget that. I've been looking for an excuse to make an episode called Vacuum Raccoon ever since, too.
Thank you, Bee's Knees, for your super chat. And I think this is a raccoon dancing on the screen.
I'll have to check it on the
We have a question here from Mr. Bear. Isaac, do you think that humans could coexist with truly sapient AI, or would we have to have intermediaries or even segregation?
That's one of those impossible to answer questions, but I like to think that we could get along with anything else that was also sapient like us. There is a reminder that we will say, well, if I get to know these people better, it's kind of a Star Trek notion, we'll all get along. And sometimes in history, that's not really the case. A lot of times, civilizations, a lot of cultural differences have gotten along best when they just kind of met at the shared river to exchange things and didn't really try to have too much of a conversation. So it depends on having instrumental goals and end goals that are compatible with each other's existence. You necessarily have to like what they want to do, but if they want to build a gigantic telescope to look at a different galaxy, that's compatible with us. We could probably get along. If they want to murder us all off or something, that's not compatible. And so you just don't know what that would happen to be at the time. But I think so. I tend to think that the thing about artificial intelligence is we still tend to think of it as these humanoid robots or a humanoid level mind, when artificial intelligence is as wide a category as intelligence itself is. So one AI might be a bee or an ant. Another AI might be a whale brain. Another thing might be a planet-sized brain that was a million times smarter than we were. And all of these with different focuses of what they're interested in. So it's just such a huge category that you can't speak to what would our relationship with AI be. Because they're saying, what would our relationship with animals be? I was like, well, hippopotamuses or bees or kittens? Very different thing.
So I'm laughing over here because Escala says, is it possible that my dryer is a time machine? I put in 9 pairs of socks and only 8.5 come out. Inquiring minds want to know.
All folks know that space warps strangely inside dryers. They steal socks. And they steal socks. And sometimes they'll appear weeks, months later.
Yush says, Happy New Year's from Albania.
Yeah.
And Dreamer says, I love this show.
Thank you. Life advice as a new parent: if you want to have a much easier life of laundry, you can have one washer, but get 2 dryers. Get like a stackable or dryer right next to it. It makes life so much easier.
Especially when they run through their
their
belts regularly.
Yeah.
Dane Belling, thank you for your super chat. I just saw that you had given us 2 of them. Thank you very much. He wanted to say that getting the flu and COVID back to back has given me a lot of time to catch up on older episodes that I hadn't seen yet. I just wanted to say thank you for all of the hours of content that you have made, and Happy New Year.
Well, thank you, and I hope you're feeling better soon. I hate catching 2 colds or viruses in a row. I think I have a congestion in my ear right now, which is kind of amusing because Sarah's off to the side of me trying to talk to me. We had our mic up a little bit loud for a while so I could hear her better. But it is never fun getting colds in the wintertime and then getting another one just as soon as you're getting better. So I hope you're all feeling better and get well soon.
Patrick Doonan says, I can't believe this show has been going for 14 years. I think that's a misnomer.
That is, well, if you look at YouTube, we'll claim the channel was made in 2012. That's when I made the email account that the channel was used from. I posted something there that was like because at the time when YouTube was literally post your own videos, and they weren't like big channels.
Was that like the ALS challenge at the time?
Yeah, no, I dumped water on the funny thing about that, ice water, and I explained first how it's not on there anymore. So you won't be able to see it. Dig through my Facebook, you'll see that, and my Facebook you can go look back through that. But the ALS challenge there was to dump water on you. And I was explaining, putting some salt in there, how you could change, the temperature of the water would melt or thaw at, but that whether it had a couple ice cubes or not, I had to make a science lesson. This is before the channel was out there. And I went outside, and my cat Flax is walking along by me, and we still have the same cat, by the way. But he comes in, trying to place the lighting to dump this water on my head, and on the video clip, all you see is I dumped the water on my head, start cursing, I bleeped it out, and the cat just runs. He wasn't expecting it. He's like, why did you dump? He had no idea I was planning to dump water over my head, I assume there. But there's a couple of videos like that, or like when I was going over what the local levies on the ballot were going to be, because I'm the chairman of the Board of Elections locally, so I was always keeping track of what the ballots were. and the raccoon that used to hang out on my porch side feed Cheerios. There were a handful of videos like that up. And for the earliest subscribers to the channel, back when there was only like 4 or 5 videos and there was no channel, would actually remember when those videos were still up there. And those were from like 2012 and 13 and early 14. But canonically, the first episode of the show is 2014, September 17th, Mega Structural Summary video. And everything before that got deleted off of there.
That was only half of Patrick's comment.
Oh, well.
His other half is Happy New Year. I wish
Happy
to
New Year,
ask,
too.
what are the upcoming plans for the National Space Society? Is an O'Neill cylinder construction in the works?
I wish I could say that it was in the works, but no, we're not building one at the time. Everyone there would love to, though. I think the next big event we have coming up will be, we always do our International Space Development Conference on the last week and weekend of May. And that's the next big event we have coming up for that. I know there's some other events coming up locally at this or that chapter or you can see that on the website, which is nss.org. But at the moment, the big focus on that. That's going to be in LA this year, so we're having more of a sci-fi theme. And I need to talk to Tony and see who the actual guest author is going to be. So should be very exciting. I will mention it on the channel as we get closer to it. So kind of one of those New Year's things, though.
Marduk GK Ob says, thank you for your super chat, by the way. If the idea that gravity is weak because it affects other universes is true, might dark matter simply be aggregate gravity from other universes?
Probably not. Although, before I get off on that, we don't build space stations. We do 2 different contests that have about 20,000 students participate in them every year where they design their own space stations. And I am one of the judges for that now, which is kind of fun. You get to meet all these high schoolers or even middle schoolers who build these space station designs, and some of them will come over and
They're
actually
very
show them
ambitious.
off. Yeah, they're very ambitious. I mean, a lot of them, you see certain similarities. There tends to be a lot of Stanford Tauruses and things like that, or neocylinders, but that is pretty awesome. And, if you are a teacher and you ever had an interest in being, helping a group of students get involved in that contest, please shoot me an email. I'll be glad to walk you through the process of getting those involved. So we usually have a few hundred students show up to the actual conference itself to show off their space station designs. But again, tens of thousands participate every year. It's really awesome. Could dark matter be gravity spilling in from other universes? It's been suggested, same for dark energy. The problem is, the question becomes, why is it clumping? We can see the effect of the dark matter through its gravity, and so, or at least through that mass, and so we know that it tends to clump around large bodies of mass, but not always. That's that bullet cluster thing, is where it kind of had the big chunk of mass and moved out the side through a collision, but hadn't moved the dark matter, so because you can't really collide with dark matter, thus it was offset, and so we knew that the cloud was independent. Because that was the idea that, well, maybe it's just a weird effect of gravity we haven't quite seen yet, that it's stronger. So when it was off here and this was there, you'd have to explain why it was lagging, and that didn't make sense. Same for a lot of the other ones there, is what's causing that. Could be maybe the gravity tails a hole into another universe and the gravity will leak through slowly from there. And there have been a lot of ideas that are represented by this, but to me the easiest one is that they're just heavy particles that don't interact much. Like neutrinos can go through a light year of lead, and there are a lot of particles that are more massive than protons and neutrons already out there. So it's just one that doesn't interact much and is also very massive, and for some reason is very common. Still strikes me as the best solution. Time will tell.
So, Alan Valant, thank you for your super chat. I'd like to recommend to you The Golden Acumen by John C. Wright, and if you read it, I hope you'll explore its concepts one day, and Happy New Year.
Thank you.
Lucas Chap says, does time still have a direction in the quantum realm?
It should, but does not, might be the better answer on that. Quantum gravity, well, time and quantum and gravity and quantum do not really get along very well. But you can have things go backward in time in quantum, for instance. No absolute bar on that. And indeed, as we talked about in some of the episodes, we talked about virtual particles, which are not real anyway, but pale particle production would be a better way to think of that. You think of it as like, here's an electron, here's a positron, and they're splitting off from each other, and then they are for some reason re-merging and annihilating. And it says, well, why they split and then somehow come back together again to annihilate? One of the other versions of that is that it's just a particle, and that it pops forward and when it runs out of time, it goes backwards and ceases to exist. So it's kind of just going pop, pop. And it looks like an antimatter particle when it's going backward in time. So you can have reverse effects of time in quantum, but I for my part, tend to assume that will not necessarily hold true when we have a better and more full understanding of how time and gravity work at the quantum scale.
Janie Lasila says, I'm getting some drink and pizza for the new year in 20 minutes. Happy New Year, Isaac. Have you considered what kind of cuisine that people may develop while living in a weightless environment?
I am sure that we had space food up as one of the poll options. I'm just trying to remember when that actually comes up. We do have space food either as one of the most recent poll options or will be one in January. So I have been thinking about it because I never put a poll topic up there for everyone to vote on unless I at least have thought about it enough to say I could find an episode on this. But I probably would need to do some of those polls because we are switching, and this is one thing, is now the live stream is over. And now that we have almost a year of extra episodes built up on Nebula that will be coming over from Nebula when they're 1 year old, we'll be switching over to a 7-episode per month setup. So every Thursday we'll still have an episode, and then if it's a month that has 4 Thursdays, there will be 3 Sunday episodes. And if it's an episode that's got 5 Thursdays, then it'll be 2. And we'll just kind of be switching into that. It will probably be midsummer before we're fully in that flow. But since I've gotten to enjoy so much, I like making the little pictures of the episode and the cover art for that. It gives me an idea what I want to think about while I'm doing the art for that up, what the episode should look like. So since if you're having 7 episodes a month and you're having a poll that's got 4 a month there, if you're only doing 2 a month, that's probably not sufficient quantity of polls to actually find out what sort of episodes people want to do. Though I do sometimes just do one on a whim, so we'll see how that goes.
It seems that some of your viewers have viewpoints on what we should eat, like space spaghetti and bootleg lasagna.
Well, we had lasagna last night. We had a dinner party last night. Some friends over had lasagna. And
things you can hold in one hand.
Spaghetti is actually my favorite meal other than steak, to be honest.
Flor Horbeck asks if there's anything that comes to mind to rule out when gravity broke symmetry, if it broke symmetry in one dimension at a time, or if the last symmetry breaking was inflation, or something along those lines.
Yeah. The part of the problem is I was thinking about cooking hamburgers on my stew.
Now we're thinking
about
off
food now.
into space food. Uh-oh.
So symmetry breaking. I'm going to punt on that question because I'm not sure I can answer that decently, especially in
How about this one?
A quick one.
Do vacuum raccoons eat Cheerios?
That's a better question. I have no idea on that one either, though. I remember with the raccoon who would come to the porch, it was a smoker at the time I go outside and smoke on my porch, and there's this raccoon that would come by and eat the Cheerios or board seed I left out on the squirrel feeder. And I got to the point where I was just kind of throwing him Cheerios when he was nearby. Something I had to do, like a little container of them. And he got closer and closer, and because I keep cats, and he's getting pretty relaxed about this. I was sitting there smoking one time. He's up nearby me, and I kind of reached over and petted him. And I don't remember exactly what happened at that point. All I remember was I was over here, and then he was over here. We kind of looking at each other saying, I'm going to let that go, but let's not ever do that again. I'm not a pet. Don't pet me. But he'd also go fishing a lot, too, in my pond out back. So we used to have these bullfrogs, and he'd go rip it, and then they just go quiet sometimes. You go fishing and get them.
So Primaris asks, have you ever thought about making a video on angel netting like in Orion's Arm?
I actually don't know that one. Oh, it's a few no's in a row.
No. Oh, we're stumping you.
I'm trying to think what angel
playing
netting
Stump Isaac Arthur at the end of the last live stream of the year, live stream number 60.
Right on the dot, yeah. And I would say this is the 5th anniversary because it's 12 years that we've skipped 3 or 4 live streams. I didn't do one when I was in ISDC last time. I didn't do one on our honeymoon. And I didn't do one... We did an episode while we were on our honeymoon, but I just released it from the queue. It's just had to hit a couple buttons. Most of the episodes are made like 3 months early and left there to air about 2 weeks before the episode comes out, too. And I can't... Oh, yeah, I skipped one last month, and I had one other I skipped because I was really sick, too. I can't remember what the one was there. So I think our first one, I want to say, was either August or September one. Was there a question attached to that? Kind of off on a tangent.
Angel netting?
Yeah,
have you done an episode on angel netting?
I nope. The concept would stick in my head if I'd done an episode on it.
Okay.
Send it to me, though, and by email. I think I actually had the email up on I'm doing the intermission, but again is isaac.arthur. YouTube, spelled UTUBE, not like the actual show. I don't know why I thought that was amusing at the time to do it that way, but I did. That's the email.
That's how I thought it was always spelled until like actually growing up and looking at it.
Well, what surprised me is that apparently the T in YouTube is supposed to be capitalized, but yeah. But again, if you leave in the comments, I usually will catch any comments on any episode in the first day or so, but I don't usually come back to them too often unless YouTube sends me a notification, and they do not send me notifications of every message. So if it's on the first day on a video, including the live stream, yes, I usually will see it there. After that, it's better if you have a specific question related to an episode to email it to me or hit me on social media.
Okay, so the last question I was going to do, and I'm going to have to paraphrase because it rearranged the chats again and I cannot seem to find it, is from Arcanlight.
Beat up by YouTube today, are we?
Well, this chat is driving me crazy. I'm really missing the mods. So, any rate, Arcanlight says, so if we were ever to crack immortality in your lifetime, where would you see yourself being 1,000 years from now, 10,000 years from now?
Me personally, probably, well, I don't know if I'd be in this physical office. I'm sure I'd rearrange the house at least a little bit by then, but I would expect to still be on my farm here 1,000 years from now, and maybe even 10,000 years from now, depending on how population growth was occurring, how much stuff we've been building in space. But I don't know. The thing is, I wouldn't imagine I'd keep doing the channel that entire time, although I don't know that I'd ever stop doing the channel so much. I'd just do some other things too and maybe like cut back to be able to do this as a occasional thing. I would want to try to learn every hobby and profession I could get away with doing, but that's always so hard to predict on that. Where will you be 1,000,000 years from now? Could a human-like mind even have 1,000,000 years worth of memories? Hopefully still married to the same person.
Hopefully, I'd still be alive by then if you were.
Yeah, well, that's
I guess
the idea.
Immortality is the
I'd be really
assumption
shocked if
that
you
you'd
didn't
be
live longer
alive.
than me unless it was like, let's see, I'd love to have like a nice big cyborg body with missile racks that could just go stomping out the scenery, like, terrorizing folks with. But there's this episode of Futurama where Richard Nixon's a head in a jar and he's losing a vote, and then he emerges as some kind of gigantic titanium body, and I've always wanted one of those for my own, so maybe like that. Like like Nixon for Futurama. Let's see. 1,000 years from now, I'd like to think that I had actually gotten to visit a place like the Moon or Mars, though, if that has been built up like that since then. But mostly, it's not so much where would I like to be in 1,000 years, but where would I like to see humanity be in 1,000 years. I'd like to see us have, a few hundred space colonies by then at least. And that'd be the big thing is, not so much what are you doing in 1,000 years, what is everybody else doing? And I think so long as there's a humanity out there doing some interesting things, I'll find some way to preoccupy myself. In the meantime, I'm content to keep doing this show because it's been a wonderful, wonderful time doing it. And, well, I guess as the end for the live stream, at least for the near future, the show is going to keep on going and going strong for as long as you guys are willing to take the time to watch it. And I am really grateful for everyone tuning in both today and for the last 9.5 years. And keep tuning in for the next 9,000, and I'll keep making the show. And until then, thank you for watching. Have a great week and have a great new year.
Happy New Year's.
Thank you for joining us for another monthly live stream. If we missed any of your questions, feel free to put them in the comments on the episode, and we'll see you on Thursday. But if you don't want to wait, you can check out any of this month's recent episodes or see our bonus content over on Nebula at go.nebula.tv/Isaac Arthur. As always,